I have had the most fascinating encounters with individuals from all walks of life, Cam, from all walks of life. The experiencer phenomena is not specifically tied to any particular class or ethnicity. It is a widespread phenomena that is bigger than those, little small delineations. So for about the past dozen years, I've been very active in this particular form of hypnotherapy. I am also for the Eastern Seaboard and for this part of Canada, I am also the hypnotherapist that works in conjunction with MUFON.
Lesley Mitchell-Clarke is a consulting hypnotist and a member of the National Guild of Hypnotists with a special certification in past life regression. Tonight we'll talk about hypnotic regression and her new book launch next week with co-author Wes Roberts. That and more coming right up on My Alien Life.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brower. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, 1, 0, and liftoff.
Welcome to My Alien Life. I'm Cameron Brower, and with me tonight is the most talented guest I've been allowed to interview, Lesley Mitchell-Clarke. Lesley, thank you for being here and welcome.
Cameron, thank you so very much for having me on your wonderful podcast. I'm so excited to speak with you.
I'm equally excited, and thanks for being here. Lesley, you're a jazz musician, singer, actor, author, and a hypnotherapist. Now you have a book coming out with Wes Roberts called Intersections, A True Story of Extraterrestrial Contact. Where do you get this new burst of energy, and how can I get myself some? It's a rare thing. You know that.
Well, thank you. I don't want to make it sound like I'm like the goddess Shiva, like doing all of these things at maximum at all times.
Or at the same time.
Yes, it's kind of a little more linear than that. But actually about 12 years ago, after many years, in the entertainment business, particularly the music business, I just really felt a calling to do something else. And in my earlier life, I had, quite a bit of medical training. I was a psychiatric technician, which is kind of like a psychiatric nurse here in Canada. So I knew I wanted to do something that would be related to mental health care. So my husband, bless his heart, he bought me a past life regression session with a hypnotherapist that I did not study with, but at any rate, I went to her place and I had this process. And to say it was life-changing for me would be, really an underestimate. It was profound because it actually showed me what I wanted to do. So I went back to school. I studied at the Ontario Centre for Hypnosis, and I became a hypnotherapist. And then eventually, I was able to earn, further credentials, and I became certified in what we call metaphysical hypnosis, which includes past life regression, interlife regression, which is fascinating, and also energy release. So I became interested in working with experiencers really almost from the downbeat. In fact, I had my own experience when I was about 17 years old, and it fueled an interest in all of this that is ongoing. So what began happening is people just began coming to me with repressed memories or missing time of what they believed to be extraterrestrial encounters. So I began working with these individuals, and I eventually adapted past life regression techniques that I was taught by my mentor, Dr. Georgina Cannon. I adapted these processes to be utilized for the regression of possible experiencers. And since that time, I have had the most fascinating encounters with individuals from all walks of life. Cam, from all walks of life. The experiencer phenomena is not specifically tied to any particular class or ethnicity. It is a widespread phenomena that is bigger than those, little small delineations. So for about the past dozen years, I've been very active in this particular form of hypnotherapy. I am also for the Eastern Seaboard and for this part of Canada, I am also the hypnotherapist that works in conjunction with MUFON. In other words, if someone reports an encounter or suspected encounter or missing time or you name it, I'm the person that will work with those individuals to hopefully recover the balance of their memory.
I want you to hold that thought for just a minute. And I know you're an amazing hypnotherapist, and that's a logical place to start. But since I actually have you here and your interests are so varied, I'd like to kind of start with you before hypnotherapy. What was it like growing up? You are so good at so many things. Why so many interests at an early age, and what started that?
Well, I would have to, in part, credit that to just from coming from a very, very highly artistic family. My late father, Gordon Whitey Mitchell, was a Emmy-winning television producer and writer, and he worked for many years with Norman Lear and wrote for All in the Family. He created the Jeffersons. He worked on Good Times. You name it. He had an Emmy for Mary Tyler Moore. So my father was a creative figure to me, and also, even peripheral to that, my grandmother was a poet. My grandfather was directed operas. So we had a lot of creative influences going in our family, myself and my brother and my sister. So I would say I grew up in a kind of a rarefied atmosphere in a way, and also in addition to that, my paternal grandmother, my Grammy Mitchell, was extremely open to metaphysical concepts of all kinds. I think she herself was quite psychic, although she probably would not say that, being the modest person that she was. But, I had many interesting spiritual experiences in her different homes and in her gardens, and they were magical places. So I think in my case, environment is part of it, and also maybe a strong genetic predisposition to do all of these different things.
So how do you think, you may know the answer to the question, I hope you do, that your dad was a jazz bassist, a musician in the 50s, and then he went on to write Get Smart, All in the Family, the Jeffersons. How does that happen?
Well, I think that my dad was always, the writer internally. He was always funny and concern with with writing. Now I should say he wrote quite a bit for various jazz magazines when he was still a working musician. And of course, one of those was Downbeat. He wrote for Downbeat, and he wrote a very funny article, apparently, which was about the club date business. And this article was so funny that Lenny Bruce got in touch with him. And Lenny Bruce knew my late Uncle Red Mitchell quite well, but I don't believe he knew my dad personally. Anyway, they touched base, and Lenny Bruce told my dad that he was talented and he should go to Los Angeles and write for television. And he took that to heart. And it wasn't an overnight thing, but pretty close to it. He bundled us all up from New York City, where we're from, and took us out to the West Coast, to Los Angeles. And I think within about 3 months, my dad had sold his first script, which was to a very funny, short-lived TV series called My Mother the Car, which starred Jerry Van Dyke.
Love Jerry Van Dyke.
Oh, he was great. So anyway, that was my dad's, if you could call it his big break, that was it. And then after that came his association with Get Smart. And, that was with Mel Brooks and all the marvelous writers that worked on that show for so long.
It's pretty outstanding writing there too, as well. So as a kid, who did you grow up with? What was the neighborhood like? Who were the kids?
Well, in my neighborhood in New York, in my early life, I grew up in a part of New York City that's called Astoria, which is essentially Greek and Irish. And it's a long-standing neighborhood, a family neighborhood, probably you would say working class, maybe lower middle class, but a wide ethnicity. And when I was a kid growing up, it was then starting to become maybe a little more Latin-oriented. There have since been some big immigrations into Astoria there. But in Los Angeles, we lived in a place called Sherman Oaks, which is in the San Fernando Valley. So I was a valley girl, and that was far less ethnically mixed, especially at that time. So my neighborhood was pretty... I went to school, even though we didn't have this fabulous income. I went to school with a lot of movie stars' kids. I was in a children's theater with Melanie Griffith. She was one of my childhood buddies. So we were kind of immediately sort of rubbing shoulders with people in the entertainment business.
Guess what my favorite Melanie Griffith movie is? Give it a try.
Oh boy,
it's one of my favorite movies. Yeah.
I'm Milk Money.
Cherry 2000.
Well, I was close.
It's I think it's a post-apocalyptic movie, and she's amazing, and actually she's really good.
Yes, she is.
It's not that great of a movie, but she's an amazing actor for that type of a movie, and it was probably a really big find for them at the time. But yeah, that's one of my favorite movies. So how did you?
I think she's a actress. Anyway, go on.
How did you get to Canada? Or is that way further in the future?
Well, that is way farther in the future. I had a big, I won't say big, but I had a consistent career out of Los Angeles, working both as an actor and also I worked an awful lot as a singer, and I took my own band with me to Japan like numerous times, and working, very nice gigs and, elegant places. So I had a whole lot of that went on. And eventually I just decided that all of that kind of, what's the word I should use? It was all, copying other people's material, right? I didn't write original songs. My band didn't do original material. It was all cover bands. And I just became, really sick of it. And I decided, well, I'm going to move to New York City, and I'm going to just sing jazz, which is what I want to do. And that's what I'm going to do. So I moved to New York, which I think was a pretty brave thing to do, and I was able to be a roommate with my dear friend Sarah Rice. She had a tiny little pad in very close to Little Italy. Anyway, so Terry and I had many mutual friends in New York. That's my husband, Terry, and in fact, it's a miracle we had never met before. We had so many mutual friends, but we met in New York, and he was there as a Canadian living in New York City and working as a jazz drummer there. So my husband, Terry Clarke, is a very renowned jazz drummer internationally. He worked with everybody. He's very famous for working with Jim Hall and many other people. And he is as far as I know, the only jazz drummer in Canada to have received the Order of Canada, which is like being knighted. So, it is being knighted. It comes from the Queen. So there you go. So I met Terry in New York, and we had our kids were born there. We have 2 sons. And when they were very little, we decided that it was just a little too rough and ready down there, and it required an awful lot of money just to have a middle-class lifestyle. So we already owned a home in Toronto, and so we decided to relocate here. And that was the best thing that we could have possibly done. It's been wonderful.
And you have hockey on every channel every night, almost every channel.
Well,
I'm a hockey fan.
I think that's a slight. Well, we have plenty of hockey and we love it. I think it's a slight exaggeration, but we certainly are behind it. That's for sure. But it's a wonderful cultural, wonderful multicultural social democracy. We have socialized medicine. It works beautifully. So we have a lot of wonderful things about Canada.
I grew up on the Canadian border, and so I had kind of the best of both worlds. And I grew up in an area that was easy to grow up in. Not a lot of jobs there, but your little bit of an income went a long way, and we could come and go back then as we pleased, back and forth anywhere to Canada. And I did that often, and even as a new driver in high school, we used to drive back and forth, and we had friends up there, and
cool.
They would come from time to time to visit us. So very nice people, a very nice culture, which is slightly different than ours, and it felt different, and it was good, and we felt that we were in a different place, and it was nice, kind of a little mini vacation when I was a kid. But
So you're an honorary Canadian.
I am kind of, yeah. I want to be one. So, and I thought that could always be a possibility that I could, be there later in life, and probably will not ever do that. But I'm within an hour of there all the time anyway, and still get to go. Still get to go a lot. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
So back up a little bit, and you had mentioned that you're an experiencer and 17 years old, right?
Yes.
And can you tell us about that?
I will. And, I had to sort of, come out about this. I discuss it extensively in the book, Intersections, but it's really the first time that I had spoken about it publicly. In fact, I hadn't even discussed it with my husband, which is amazing, but true. So I'm just going to set the stage a little bit. I was barely 17, and I had a job as an actress working at a summer stock theater in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And as you probably know, the Black Hills are sacred Lakota land, and all kinds of sightings and activities have always gone on in the Black Hills. It's a very, I don't know if there are PowerPoints there or what the deal is, but it's a very active area. So I was a member of this company, the Summer Stock Theater, and there was a gal who was also in the company, and I can't reveal her name because she's still living, and she wouldn't appreciate that. But she was a very talented gal. She had been a singer in Vegas and worked extensively in Vegas, and she also was a horse rancher. Anyway, she told me when I first arrived something very remarkable. She told me that She was a very psychic person, and that seemed obvious to me. That I could tell. She was a psychic person, and she had been working for the U.S. government out of Vegas. They were flying her out to Area 51, every day, and she was involved in a program of communicating telepathically with ETs. And the ETs that she was communicating with were I think this was part and parcel of the of the Roswell Agreement, Truman and Eisenhower's Roswell Agreement. So these were gray aliens that she was communicating with. And after she told me all of this, on several occasions when we were driving to the nearest town, to go to a bar or whatever, and would be coming back, we would be followed literally by craft. And she would point it out, and she'd say, well, there they are. And then, of course, it would get larger, and they would follow us. And it was extremely disturbing and even, terrifying to me at that point. But I really believed her because I had visual confirmation, all the time. Now, her thing was she kept telling me she didn't want to be involved in the program anymore. So she said she was being bothered, not only by the ETs themselves, but by, government people. And it sounded a little paranoid to me, but, I accepted that. So one afternoon, I was standing literally across from where our dorm was, our accommodations, and that's where we both lived. And I saw a vehicle pull up. I could only describe it as a sort of an anachronistic, older than it should have been vehicle. This would have been 1973. Okay, So this sort of mid-60s, like giant black Chrysler Imperial or something like that pulled up. And then and that in itself was, of course, ridiculously unusual because we were right in the middle of Custer State Park. You didn't just go there unless you were coming to see a play. So out of this vehicle stepped two guys. They weren't particularly tall. And one thing I'll tell you about them, Cam, that I can remember this so vividly. Their pants were too short. They were wearing suits, like dark suits, dark hat, like, again, anachronistic. And they had on shoes that looked kind of almost like work Oxfords or something, and white socks, and their pants were too short. So why I remember that, I don't know. Anyway, I saw them go into her area where her room was, and then they came out, and I asked her about it later, and she said, well, they're just trying to convince me to get back in the program, and I'm not going to do it. So some short time after all of that, maybe about the middle of the summer, I had an incident where I had a boyfriend. I was staying with my boyfriend in his room, actually. And somewhere in the middle of the night, I'm going to estimate it was about 3 a.m., but I don't honestly know, there was a incredibly loud, now loud is the wrong word, there was a strong vibration, a low end, like 10 cycle sound vibration that was so dynamic that it awakened me. It was as if the whole room, the whole structure were vibrating. And then the whole room filled with light, and it was a blue light. And not only was it a blue light, but the atmosphere seemed to change as far as like the viscosity of the air. And it felt like maybe a little bit like an awful lot of humidity. It's the whole atmosphere began to change. And I was trying to wake up my boyfriend. I was shaking him. I was yelling at him, wake up, wake up. Nothing. And then that's the last thing I remember in that segment. I assume it was just unconsciousness, but I was sitting up and trying to awaken my boyfriend, and then the next thing, I assume that I'm out. So the morning arrives, and I wake up, and I have a terrible lower abdominal pain, like it may be in the uterus, but just lower abdominal pain, like terrible. And I also noticed that my nightgown is on backwards. And so in this like theater camp, we had a like a bathhouse, and we had to walk there. And so as I was walking up to the bathhouse, I noticed that I was in terrible pain, and I had a lot of blood running down my leg. Now, this was not, if I may be so frank, this was not a menstrual situation. This was something else. And I later had to be taken to the doctor, and the doctor said to me, "You have oh God, it's not dysplasia." He said, "You have cervical erosion." And I said, I'm 17 years old. I'm practically a virgin. What is cervical erosion? And he said, well, we only see it when women have had multiple babies, multiple pregnancies. It's where the interior lining of the cervix pooches out. That's why it happens. And, I was mystified and horrified. And there were some other, physical repercussions, which, are not really that relevant to this story. But the fact remains that something very profound happened to me, or had been happening to me all summer. And I am allowing myself to think that it most likely had to do with obtaining genetic material.
Did you go through regression therapy for that?
I did not. This was so long ago. This occurred, as I said, in 1973. And that's something that I would probably do now, oddly, but I've only recently remembered the conscious parts of it. And I'm kind of the opinion, after doing all of this work in memory and missing time and what have you, I am kind of the opinion that certain memories are time dated, if you will, and that they begin to come to the surface, possibly either when the individual is ready to know about them, or maybe memory repression that's done by an ET culture, or even by perhaps a government ET program. Maybe it's imperfect. Maybe there is no such thing as completely eradicating memories. In any event, we have tremendous success in allowing these individuals who have experienced these events of high strangeness to put together the missing pieces and begin to understand their lives.
You've heard accounts, extraterrestrial accounts, abduction accounts from people who have, and I'm talking about just in general, I've heard these accounts to myself, and I'm not a hypnotherapist or any kind of regression therapist, but there are people who have an account or an experience, and 20 years later, they're driving down the road and something triggers a memory. Any idea?
Yeah.
Any idea what happens there?
Well,
with that individual.
There you have again an example of a memory bubbling up to the surface significantly enough that it enters the conscious mind, and that can happen. That the memory can work like that. It can be triggered by a seemingly random event or repetitive event, and so in answer to your question, many of the people who come to see me are having a lot of recovered memory in just that same way that you describe, where they'll be doing a, normal activity, they could be with people, they could not be with people, and something about that activity, maybe it is even driving at the woods, but it becomes a trigger where they then are allowed to, receive some of this memory consciously.
That's interesting. Can you explain how you as a hypnotherapist would guide an abductee or an experiencer in a positive direction after maybe they had a very negative experience and are traumatized by that?
Okay, well, firstly, I must say that contrary, to the work of David Jacobs and some other individuals, the vast majority of people that I work with have positive experiences. Also, the vast majority of people that I work with are lifelong experiencers. Their experiences generally begin, around the age of 3 or so, and so these individuals are very special people. I would also say that the vast majority of them, or all of them, have higher than normal psychic abilities, telepathic abilities, abilities to bilocate, all of those kinds of things. These people just seem to have, in abundance naturally. But when someone comes to me, of course, as you can imagine, not everybody that comes to me is mentally stable and has actually had these types of experiences. I have to be able to determine when someone is having a mental health issue and then direct them to the right practitioner. So because as a hypnotherapist, even as a psychiatric technician in the States, I can work with mentally ill people or people who have had a diagnosis of mental illness, but not in Canada. So if someone is having a dissociative event, if they're confabulating, if they're in a manic state, any of those things, my colleagues and I all will refer that person to a accepting either a psychotherapist or psychiatrist. So the first thing that I do is I establish, and I do that partly by intuition, partly by taking an extensive medical history. I am looking for any signs of, mental instability. So after I do that, then I generally, have just a chat with the person, and they will, tell me about the parts of the things that they remember, or things they remember in their entirety. They will talk to me about the reasons why they are now, coming for some sort of help. So if all that goes positively, then I will have the person actually come to see me for a session. And in a hypnotherapy session, I should also say it is a very positive, very gentle experience. So the person who comes to me always leaves feeling better. Because along with the memory regression, we're also releasing stress. We're dealing with any behavioral things the person wants to change. It's a whole sort of a gestalt of the person that I'm dealing with. Now, when we are working in regression, the way that I do it when working with an experiencer is first I get the individual into a nice, satisfying trance. Now, there are many, many levels of consciousness, of course, but for the sake of hypnosis, we talk about 6 levels of trance. Now, levels 5 and 6 are quite deep. I usually bring people to those levels only if I'm doing some type of palliative pain management, or also in the case of regression. And then what I generally do to sort of limber up the memory, if you will, is I move around in that person's life a little bit, and we move back, and I have them tell me about happy events in their own life, and we move around a little bit before I either go to maybe the earliest experience that a person has had of high strangeness, or I may go to an experience where someone has a chunk of conscious memories, but not the whole picture. So it's an individual matter, like kind of where we go from that point. But I always put the person into a relaxing, satisfying, deep trance that will allow that little curtain, that little membrane that separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind, that little membrane needs to dissolve. And so that's what we do.
When you're meeting with a new client and they have had some trauma in their life and they can't quite put a finger on it, do you ever have to make a decision whether this has been a past life issue or possibly an alien abduction issue?
Well, certainly, but I must tell you, I always go with, the present life first. I'm not going to jump to a conclusion unless pretty much everything that I do to resolve an issue in dealing with the current temporal life, unless that doesn't work, then I will go, further to the next level. But most of the time, what people come to me with is fairly easily located and resolved, and it's most often from their present time life.
So are these people exhibiting physical symptoms that are causing them issue, or is it more of a, I'm wondering about this type of a situation? Is there physical symptoms that you can identify?
Are you speaking of experiencers now?
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, I'm telling you, the people that I work with have some astonishing scars and marks that have very no known association to any injury or trauma or medical procedure. Sometimes they look like triangles. Sometimes they are linear, like long lines. You name it, I have seen it. And the individuals that I work with have absolutely no memory of, how these things occurred. They just go to bed and they wake up and they have all kinds of, demarcations. Wes Roberts, from my book, his, he has had all kinds of marks. I remember, I don't know if I still have a picture, but some years ago, he sent me a picture of several triangles on his chest that were just, red in color, as if it was maybe some kind of sunburn or something. But, it didn't seem to have any particular effect on anything. They just woke up with these marks. Now, what I think is going on a lot of the time here is I think that individuals are, in fact, receiving upgrades or like step-up transformers. I think they are receiving maybe nano hardware or other, what we would think of as futuristic developments to increase their PSI factor, their telepathic ability, maybe even their telekinetic skills. I think that's what's going on.
Nonetheless, that these folks have to actually endure some sort of procedure when they're away. Have any of them described any of that in detail?
Some of them have, and what we are seeming to find is the individuals that experience these things are far less, victims than you would think. In other words, they seem to have relationships. Once you get in there and get into the whole nuts and bolts of the experience, how long it's been going on, who's involved, are there, what kind of beings are you interchanging with. It's once you get in there, generally the individual finds out that they have taken a responsibility, that they are involved in a project, and what the project seems to be on many of these encounters is a general raising of the awareness of mankind.
Any idea what that would be for?
Well, I kind of think that if we don't do it, we're gonna blow the fuck out of ourselves. You know what I mean? I kind of think that we are at a really incredible turning point right now. Either violence and hatred and poverty and desperation wins, or love and compassion and care for the people and children of this planet and for the planet itself wins. We are polarized now.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And being that we're incapable, it seems of doing that ourselves, and the last 2,000 years certainly is a testament to that. I think that we could take any help that we can get. Can anyone be hypnotized if they come in to see you? Can anyone be hypnotized?
What we generally say is every person who is psychologically normal can be hypnotized. Now, when someone comes to me, say for, I don't know, something like smoking cigarettes or weight loss or a phobia, I don't need to get them into the deep types of trances that are required for doing regression work. I only need to get someone to what we call level 3. And I'll ask you, have you ever had an experience where you're driving your car from point A to point B and you're thinking about stuff, right? And you arrive at your destination and you don't have a clear memory of how you got there. Has that ever happened to you?
I think you just described my whole entire life, including driving, but yeah, absolutely.
Well, we actually call that driving hypnosis, and it is level 3. So that is actually as deep as you need to be to receive and embody hypnotic suggestions. So, and that's it's really just a deep state of relaxation. So I have had almost no occasions where I couldn't get somebody into a state of relaxation that was deep enough for them to receive suggestions. And of course, as somebody works with me, then the second time they come, they're not even thinking about, can I be hypnotized? And they just go right in. So even if someone has their trepidations and is a little anxious and what have you, the first time they see me, subsequent visits are always easier, and then the trances get deeper.
Is hypnosis a therapy becoming mainstream? Are you getting referrals from mainstream physicians and therapists?
Well, I always get referrals from medical doctors for things like insomnia, any kind of drug addiction issue. We can turn people right off to whatever it is that they're abusing. Weight loss. Maybe they have some repetitive habit of scratching, nail biting, you name it. So we do get referrals from doctors, from medical doctors all the time. I think the thing that is difficult, and now I'm going to speak briefly about the Canadian system, but in our socialized medicine, which is done province by province, but in Ontario, where I live, at one time, our provincial health insurance covered things like chiropractic, massage therapy, hypnosis, things that they know help people. But as money became tighter and the whole what they covered shrank, now we don't have insurance coverage for hypnotherapy. So in that sense, and sadly, it becomes almost elitist because it's like acupuncture. It's one of those things that I think probably in the States they do have insurances that cover supplemental treatments. In fact, I know they do, but we don't have anything like that here in Canada. So, but I do my very best to make whatever I'm doing affordable for the person that I'm working with. I have a whole, sliding scale. So I do my best to make it work.
Forgive me if I get this wrong, but let's just take, I know that insomnia is not a simple problem, but if we took a problem like insomnia, what are you actually doing for the patient? Are you reprogramming the brain or retraining them to sleep? How does that work?
Yes, I am. I'm actually shutting down old neural pathways of behavior that don't work and creating new neural pathways, and that happens in every hypnosis process. Now, as you said, insomnia it can be very complex. Now, the two big types are if a person has trouble getting to sleep initially, and that one is harder to deal with, and I don't know why, but it is. Because that person that has trouble falling asleep initially really believes they're not going to sleep. So you have to go to elaborate lengths to get their subconscious to accept that they can sleep. So yes, what we're doing in a sleep and an insomnia process is I will be using progressive relaxation. In other words, I will be relaxing each muscle group from the top of their head to the tips of their toes. So I am getting that person into an extended, deep, and really pleasurable state of relaxation. And then I may tell their subconscious mind to release the chemicals for sleeping, like melatonin and dopamine. I may even, if the person is visual, if they're a visual processor, I may even have them visualize their pineal gland releasing melatonin into the body. And so those kinds of things are what I do for people who have trouble sleeping initially. I will also have them get on some kind of a routine before they even get to bed. And I will give them post-hypnotic suggestions and triggers that will make them sleepy as soon as they see their bed. So I do all kinds of stuff like that. Now, for the person who is wakeful, who wakes up periodically, that is generally a stress-related response. And what is happening there is the individual is so overwhelmed with stressors that they are not passing out of REM sleep into their deep sleep stages. So not only are they wakeful because they're very close to being awake, they're just in REM, but they're also not getting the deep sleep that the human body and mind and spirit require to carry on, the deep sleep. And in that deep sleep, we also have profound dreams, and that's only a recent discovery. It used to be thought that dreams only occurred during the REM state. Well, that is not true. The kind of dreams that we have in REM sleep tend to be more disturbing because they're about releasing trauma and stress.
Interesting. How many sessions do you usually see a person for regression therapy?
Well, it depends very much on what the person wants to achieve. Most people who have past life regressions will come one time. And I try, if we have enough time, because I can only keep the person under about an hour with good medical practice. So I try to bring them to 3 different lifetimes. And always, we use the suggestion of, that the person should know about or hear about the lifetimes that are most applicable to this current life, so that they get a profound insight and message, either about repetitive negative behavior, about why they feel certain ways, maybe they experience recognizing family members or a partner. So for past life regression, it's usually a one-time thing, but people will also come see me for interlife regression, which is really fascinating. That is an exploration of the life between lives. In other words, it's all about where we were and what we thought and what we did and what our reasons were for coming into this physical lifetime.
Do some abductees have something in common, something that when they walk into your office, you can recognize that immediately?
I think so. I do think so. They have something extra. They have a luminousness about them that I have come to be sensitive to. And of course they experience many of the same things, you know, the missing time, the sleep disturbances, the nightmares, they have the marks on the body, you know, they share all of these things that they live with. But yes, they do have a certain thing about them. Now, I should probably, you know, as I said, most people have positive experiences. I also work with a number of individuals, and this gets a little controversial, but I work with a number of individuals who are in what I would have to call the secret space program, or have been in it, rather. Forgive me, have been. And this is a kind of a thing that went on, I believe, beginning in the 1950s with reverse engineered technology. I believe it began under the Eisenhower administration and the Truman administration, as I mentioned. And I think with reverse engineering, we have developed a parallel space program. I believe that we have had bases on Mars and on the moon for a very long time, and that many, many individuals have been inducted into, you know, the Mars Defense Force and the Earth Defense Force and other similar black ops operations. And both men and women are involved in these kinds of things. And this is where I see the most trauma. This is where I see the most emotional damage. This is where I hear, you know, terrible stories of, you know, people using a variety of techniques trying to fracture the personality. I mean, the worst possible things that I have ever heard have been in relation to what human beings are doing to each other.
How did you meet Wes Roberts?
Well, Wes actually was kind of a friend of a friend. He was referred to me because even, you know, like 12 years ago or so, I was beginning to be involved in working with experiencers. And he was referred to me, and it took me a while to get him, you know, to come in and see me. He was extremely, I would say, mistrustful, shy, reticent. So we had several phone conversations before he finally came to see me at my treatment space.
I did listen to you with him a couple of times, and yeah, he does seem very, very shy. You know, even though he speaks very well, with you, it just, there's that little edge that you can tell that there's that as well. You and Wes have authored the book Intersections, a True Story of Extraterrestrial Contact, and you have the book launch that's coming up on the 15th of August. Tell me about Wes's experience.
Well, Wes is one of those people who is, in fact, a lifelong experiencer. And he also has people within his family group, other people who have had experiences. So I have no doubt that there's some genetic reason why, you know, they have interest in him. Now, his interactions are most of the time not with grays at all, but he interacts with beings that are, I suppose you would maybe call them tall whites. They're very, very slender, very tall. There aren't a lot of different definitions between the females and the males as far as the are tall, and the women have platinum, like kind of a platinum blonde hair. So he has mostly interacted with a specific group of beings. And this has been going on since he was a tiny, tiny little boy. And when he did finally come to see me, I think he was at the place where he really doubted his own sanity. He was incredibly nervous. He couldn't sleep. There was no sleeping going on, like, at all. So, there you go. That was one of the first things that we did, is I helped him to make an agreement with the beings where he would do whatever was necessary on the weekend, but during the week he had to sleep at night, and it actually worked.
So do you still feel that this is, I shouldn't put it this way. Do you feel that this is a violation? I mean, a violation of our space, personal space, a violation pretty much of everything, because these beings seemingly take some of us against our will. Was that the case with Wes?
Not so much. Wes really has come to understand that he's a participant. But what you're talking about, there were, again, we have to go back to the agreement with the Greys that was made by Truman. And what I understand, and of course this was greatly explored in of course Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, many other books, the agreement seemed to contain the idea that we being the United States, of course, would receive a lot of technology that would help us to win the space race and all the rest of it. So we were going to receive technology, and in exchange, these particular group of Greys were going to be allowed to abduct people for the sake of genetic engineering. Now, a lot of this did go on. You have the case of Betsy and Barney Hill. There are endless cases from the 50s and 60s that embrace this barbaric invasion and abduction. I call those abductions. Absolutely. Now, as I understand it, and I was just discussing this with Richard Doan the other day, apparently this agreement made by Truman and Eisenhower is finally done and has been done for a while. So there aren't going to be any more of those types of aggressive abductions and examinations for the purpose of harvesting DNA, if that's what was going on. And, there may even, Cam, I even really think, from what I've heard, that there is a kind of a Gene Roddenberry-esque a federation of planets. And most of the beings that we are engaging with are positive and forward-thinking and are really just, trying to help, and at the same time trying to prevent us from using nuclear technology, in a improper way.
You and Wes were gradually able to recover some of his memories. How was that for Wes? I mean, after that came out and he was able to recall some of these things that he struggled with for such a long time, was there an improvement then?
Yes, well, yeah, absolutely. In fact, what I would say is knowledge is power. End of story. Knowledge is power. And when these memories, whether you accept that they bubble up on their own in a time-gated way, or whether we have to go in and get them, whatever it is, when these memories are looked at, and we can look at them in a way that makes the client an observer, so they don't emotionally have to experience pain or fear or anything like that. That's how we do it. But at any rate, these memories can be recalled, they can be processed, and they can be integrated. And therefore, what you start to do is you start to empower the person. They believe they understand that they are sane people who have had unusual experiences. And it's really a beautiful transformation to witness when I work with people that come from a place of fear and the unknown, and sometimes panic and paranoia.
There's something called sleep paralysis, and I know you're familiar with that, but one I want to ask is a little different. Sleep paralysis can render somebody conscious, but they're unable to move. Are aliens using that against us? Are they able to trigger that in order to manipulate or get information or whatever they need to do with us? Are they using that part of our body in their favor?
I think they do. I think they can turn on, I think for any kind of pain management, they can turn on our endorphin supply and direct it. I think that they have a kind of a, I don't know if it's a hypnotic technique, it's a mind control technique, I'm not sure what it is, but I really do think that is the case, that they use our own body chemistry to either conk us out or keep us from moving. Now it's not perfect, as you know, because some people have awakened while their body is still paralyzed. And I'm not talking about sleep paralysis. I'm talking about in the abduction experience. Sometimes people wake up before they're supposed to, and they're still under the influence of the narcotic that has caused a disruption between their neurological system and their brain.
And at that point, that can make that situation remarkably worse. Isn't that true? I mean, as far as what their perception would be.
Terrifying. Yeah, it can be. It usually causes quite a terrifying experience where either the person is just paralyzed and they're afraid, or they see beings leaving, or it's never pleasant when someone is wakeful. Sometimes the beings put them back to sleep. That people become so agitated when they wake up in that in between state that they're put back to sleep, and then they wake up normally later.
So over the years, you've seen a lot of stuff, and we'll put it that way. But you hear a lot of accounts that are disturbing, and you see your patients as they react to pain. How does that really affect the way you do your job? Do abduction therapists need therapy because of the job?
Well, that is a very, very interesting question, because sometimes I am deeply shaken by some of the things that I hear, particularly if there is any element of cruelty or pain, or, if I'm dealing with something. Yes. So I tell you what I do. I just try to keep, good spiritual hygiene. I'm a meditator. I've been a transcendental meditator for 40 years. So I meditate twice a day. I cleanse my space spiritually, with, sweetgrass or sage or whatever. I also, before I work with anyone in any kind of regression, we do a kind of a white light cleansing. And so I'm very, I do all of that so that I can stay always in the light, in the positive space, and I can bring the person to the positive space, no matter what they seem to be remembering.
If people feel that they've had an experience that would require them to seek help, the help that you give, what do they do to find it in the United States, and what do they do to find it in Canada?
Well, we have many practitioners across the United States and across Canada that work in this specific area. I would say a good place to start, if you are in the United States, would be with MUFON, the organization, the Mutual UFO Network. I am a member of what they call the Experiencer Research Program, which is nationwide. So no doubt they could connect you to that program and find someone for you in your region. So I would recommend that for if you're in the States. If you're in Canada, and I would not only recommend MUFON Canada, which is MUFON.ca, but there is also an organization called TESSA, the Experiencer Support Association, and they also have practitioners like myself who are on staff to work with people who have had experiences. So, and if all else fails, if you're having trouble finding someone or getting, hooked up with the right person, you can always reach out to me, and you can do so simply by emailing Lesley, Lesley, at LIGHTWORKHYPNOSIS.com.
Lesley Mitchell-Clarke, thank you for being awesome, and I really want you back again. I'd also like to give you tonight's final word.
The final word is compassion. That's the final word. And we must remember that people who've had extraordinary experiences deserve our compassion, not our ridicule. So that's my word.
My guest has been Lesley Mitchell-Clarke. Lesley, thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you so much, and I would love to come back on anytime you'll have me. Thank you so much.
We'll do it. Good night.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by Elion. You can find all Elion's work online at Heart Dance Records.